Hola, welcome to today's class. By the way, I'm practicing my Spanish. Hola, that means hi. As you can see here, I have a picture of a woman or a senior, and that means an old woman. So, who do you think she is? Well, if you said a grandmother, that is not correct. She is actually a Tibetan princess. So you might be wondering, how is this possible? Because she does not look like a princess. And so if you ask this question and thought about this, that is awesome because today we are going to read a story and find out what happened because she is a princess, but she doesn't look like a princess. So we need to know what happened. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at Google because before we go into our story, we said that she is a Tibetan princess. So first thing that we need to do is look at a map and see where Tibet is. So there's a really good map, which is this one, and we can see in all white, this is China, and then in the red is Tibet. So we can see that it's in the western part of China. And so some of the other countries, this one right here, this country is called Nepal. And then right next to Nepal is India. And then we can see South Korea on the east side. Now, there's also a lot of other good pictures about Tibet. And we can see, hey, there's a lot of mountains. It looks like a lot of grass, more mountains, and also very rocky. Notice here that in some places, like over here, there's no grass. So that's going to tell you something about the weather over there. And one thing that I don't see is trees. I mean, they do have some grass. There's no grass, but definitely no trees. Well, so let's go ahead and take a look at the story. So here we have Gunpo is a Tibetan princess. When she was young, So wore fancy clothes and jewelry and lived in a large adobe castle. So notice that when I talk about her name, even though it's spelled with a T, when English people talk about this word, the T is silent. And so I think it has something to do with the way the Chinese pronounce it. And so the way that the American people try to pronounce it is so. Okay, so when she was young, she lived like a princess, right? Usually they have nice clothes, they wear nice jewelry. Jewelries are things like necklace and earrings, and she lived in a large adobe castle. So this word adobe means the building material. So if I go back to this looks like a nice Tibetan castle. And notice that the walls, that material is going to be adobe. So adobe is like a clay material, and you can make clay from the ground, from the dirt. And so when they use it to make houses or to make castles, they call it adobe. Then, in 1958, when So was 7 years old, Chinese soldiers came to her family's home after having invaded Tibet years earlier. Okay, so this is important because in 1958 something terrible happened, and that was the Chinese soldiers came and invaded Tibet. And this word invaded means that they attacked Tibet. Her father, Tibet's king, was eventually removed from power. So when they say removed, that means he was taken away and he lost his job as the king, and that means removed. While So and her mother and her sister were exiled to rural China. Okay, so we know that her father was lost his job as the king, and the mother, sister, and so they were exiled. And exiled means that they must leave the country for punishment. And let's go ahead and just look up that word exile in Korean so that we know exactly what happened to them. So if you ever hear somebody say 추방 or 망명, that means they were exiled. And so that means they had to leave and they went to rural China. And when they say rural, that means the countryside of China where nobody's living, usually nothing there. Um, but anyways, for years, So worked on farms, separated from all she had ever known. She later learned that her family members had died. Okay, so that's really sad. So if we think about this sentence, it kind of tells us something more because previously it said that So, her mother, and her sister were exiled to rural China. So if I read this sentence, it sounds like they went together to rural China. But then in this sentence, it says for years So worked on farm, and it says here separated. So separated means not together. So separated from all she had ever known. So when they say separated from all she had ever known, that refers to her life as a princess. Okay? But then here it says she later learned that her family members had died. And so it also means that So was separated from her family because um, if she worked together with her mother and sister, and if one of them died, then she would know that because they would be living in the same place. But it says that she later learned. So that means that So was in one part of China and her mother and sister were in another part of China. So it really shows the difficult and kind of sad life she had after China invaded Tibet. Okay, so that was the first part of the story. Let's go ahead and move on to the second part. So here we have today, China governs Western and Central Tibet. So if you ever hear the word called government, this word governs is very similar. And it just means that the people manage the country. And so we usually call that the government because they manage the city or they manage the country. So we have China manages the western and central part, although eastern Tibet is an autonomous ethnic portion of several Chinese provinces. Okay, so this word autonomous means the same as independent. So you have some other group of people that control the eastern Tibet, and they are independent. And they're talking about who? So these are the eastern ethnic, I mean, it's not eastern, the ethnic portion of several Chinese provinces. Okay, so they're basically saying that here there are some Chinese provinces, and in these provinces you have some ethnic people. So ethnic means people that belong to a particular social group. And so within a country, you might have different kinds of people living there. And so those different kinds of people, those are the ethnic groups. And so they're saying that these ethnic groups control the eastern part. now So is in her 60s. So they're talking about her age, and that would match the picture we have here. She has a husband and two daughters. However, So has lived alone for the past 20 years in a small apartment in Dharamsala, India, so she can work for the Tibet exile government. Okay, so this part here, they're just saying that, okay, she continued her life, she got married, she has two daughters, but this part is kind of interesting, and this is important. So it says here that she has lived 20 years by herself in a small apartment in India. And so we have to think, okay, why does she live in India? And then the reason is so that she can work for the Tibet exile government. Okay, so let's think about that. Why does she work for the Tibet exile government? Okay, so this means here the country people, and here we got the government, and then the exile. So as punishment, they had to leave Tibet, and right now most of them are in India. So she works for this group. So why do you think she works for this group, and what does this group want to do? Think about that for a second, and then come back and see if your ideas are the same as mine. Okay, so if you said that they want to give Tibet their independence, then that is correct. So remember, a long time ago, we have China. They invaded Tibet. They took Tibet's independence and said, okay, this land belongs to China. And so not only her, but many other people probably were also exiled. And these people, some of them went to India. And so they are fighting for their country. They want their country back. They want their independence. And so this is the Tibet exile government. So let's go ahead and continue to see what else they say in the final part. So says that she is happy because she feels that she is fulfilling her duty as the Mei Kingdom's only remaining heir. Heir. Okay, so heir means the person who gets something after her parents die. So usually, if her maybe if her mother was the queen, after her mother dies, then she gets to be queen, and we call that heir. Everyone knows her history and calls her princess. Okay, so from this story, we should know several things. Okay, number one, we said that, okay, she doesn't look like a grandmother. I mean, she doesn't look like a princess. She looks like a grandmother. What happened to her? And from here, we know that when she was young, China invaded her country, and then as punishment, they said everyone in her family must leave or they were exiled. And in here, we also find out that now that she's 60, she lives in India and she works in India. And we know why, because she is fulfilling her duty, which is, she is kind of um, fighting for her country so that Tibet can be independent again. So, sounds like a very great woman, grandmother, and she sounds like a strong person. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the homework. Okay, so for homework, I would like for you to study this word exile. So you can use your foreign language dictionary. So for example, I use Naver, but then I also like to use another dictionary just an English dictionary. And then I can know more about the words if I use more dictionaries, right? So I really want you to understand this word. So I also recommend that you use multiple resources so that you can really know what the word is and how it's used. Okay, so once you understand that, then I want you to find two examples of people who were exiled. So this could be someone in Korean's history, or it could be in a neighboring country, or maybe it was something that you talked about in your class, or maybe something that you saw in the news. So anyways, you find two examples of people who were exiled, and then explain what happened, why were they exiled. Okay, so that's going to be the lesson for today. This was the story about the Tibetan princess, and I'm looking forward to reading your homework and the examples that you find. Okay, take care. Bye.